Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 7 of the Progress Report, a weekly program about local government and economic development in and around Green Bay and Brown County. I'm your host, Bill Meindl. A big thank you to Political Radar for creating, sponsoring, and producing this new show. A big story in Green Bay 6 years ago was a power plant, a waste-to-energy power plant proposed by the Oneida 7 Generations Corporation. That's an economic development arm of the United Nations. The $23 million plant was to be located in Green Bay's Bayport Industrial Center next to I-43. The plant never happened. In what was described at the time in the press as an overwhelmingly yes voice vote, the Green Bay City Council in 2011 approved the Oneida plant and construction was set to go. But a year later, the council reversed course and voted 7-5 to rescind the city's approval. Opponents of the power plant might say the council corrected an initially bad decision. Proponents might say this was another classic example of indecision by the Green Bay City Council when it comes to economic development. That decision to rescind approval cost the city a $2.5 million settlement of a lawsuit by Oneida 7 Generations. Today on the Progress Report, the alder who was elected on that power plant issue 6 years ago, it was a big part of his campaign, and helped lead the charge against the waste-to-energy proposal is my guest, Green Bay Alder Mark Steuer. Hello, Mark, and welcome to the Progress Report.
Hello, Bill. I'm raring to go.
The Oneida power plant issue is both old news, Mark, and new news. The plant proposal was rejected by the council 6 years ago, but the $2.5 million lawsuit settlement of the case just was announced earlier this year. First off, Mark, what did you think of the settlement?
Well, again, I've been in office for 6 years, and my campaign started off pretty much with that issue. Mm-hmm. So it has been a long, drawn-out process, to say the least. As far as the settlement, I'm not ecstatic about it, but I think under the circumstances, I thought we can do this and move on. There are a number of reasons why I voted the way I did, and if you'd care to talk about that, I can go into that a little bit.
Sure. I believe the $2.5 million settlement was discussed several times in closed session by the City Council. How did those discussions go?
Well, I think there's a compromise there. I mean, you get to a point where you have to figure out what is the best in terms of the long term, and we felt we were going to have to pay something. And it could have been a lot worse. And I think this was a settlement that the city and the Oneida 7 Gen, or the Oneida tribe, came up with. And we all talked about it at length, and we felt that this was probably the best move to make. This way it's done and over with. We'll cut our losses, hopefully, on this. But it was something that it could have been worse. It could have been a higher settlement. And I think that under the circumstances, I thought we made the right choice.
Why did council members feel there would have to be something paid?
Well, I think if we would have fought it and said, no, we aren't going to pay, then I think that it could have gone into litigation even further, and I think it would have been a lot worse settlement for the city. So, it's kind of like, we paid a little bit more. We paid a little up front this way. It would have been a lot worse if we would have fought it further. So we just came to that decision. Initially, when this plant came to be or was about to come to be, I was not on city council yet.
Sure.
The original vote was 11-1, and when I started campaigning, as you did bring up, I'm District 10, which is south of Elp Avenue, and it's right in the area. And when I campaigned, I was a bit of a neophyte. I understood some city politics, but I didn't really understand the campaign issue of certain things too much. But what happened was when I saw signs saying no to gasification, and I saw them everywhere, I mean hundreds of them. So my campaign was somewhat forged for me. And as an alder, you are representing the people. You are elected by the people to represent them. So in essence, they are your boss. So what I did is listen to the people, and the people were overwhelmingly against this. So, even though the council voted 11-1, my feeling was that the original site plan that was brought forth that the council looked at did not show everything that should have been shown. And the contention was that there was some misrepresentation, and that's the basis by which I and 6 other alders pursued. And we rejected it at Plan Commission. We ended up, actually the Plan Commission did vote for it, but the council overturned it. And what happened was, after that was overturned, then there was some threat of legal litigation and such. And what happened was eventually it was heard in Judge Hammer's court, and he sided with the city on this. And after that, it went to the appellate court in Wausau. And after that, once it gets to the courts, it's out of our hands. Mm-hmm. We make the best decision we can with what we have at the time. After that, it's out of our hands, and it really was. And after a process, they reversed that decision, and then we had to effectively act after that the way we did.
The power plant had all the necessary federal, state, and environmental approvals and was approved twice by the Green Bay Plan Commission. And the Plan Commission determined that there was no misrepresentation by Oneida 7 Generations.
And I do understand that. I think that when we looked at it, I have 3 or 4 neighborhood associations in District 10. The Mather Heights Neighborhood Association was the one that was closely impacted as far as the area. And we had many, many meetings and talked about this at length. And these citizens rose up and they went to the meetings and they looked at the site plans and they said, wait a minute, this is not what the council voted on. So it's a he said, she said kind of thing. And, when you make your decision 6 years ago, there's always a chance that it may or may not work out. And I think at the time, I was looking at the fact that if this plant was put in, that you would have had other issues with air quality. The air quality. I mean, initially they didn't show any stacks, any kind of emissions on the site plan. The second site plan showed emissions or stacks, and that's where the citizens got angry. They thought, well, wait a minute, that wasn't shown in the original plan. And some of the alders felt the same way. They said, well, wait a minute. So they flipped their thought process on that because they didn't see that on the original plan. One of the things I did when we studied this is I looked at other pyrolysis plants throughout the world, mm-hmm. and it was like a master's thesis. I mean, there are hundreds throughout the world, and there are plants that have literally, because they didn't work out, bankrupted communities. And I can't go into a whole long list of some of those, but there are a few in this country that because they put this plant in and they trusted the technology and what have you for it, they put their trust in it, and it backfired. The fact is, Brown County's air quality is not the greatest. We're usually in the bottom third throughout the Midwest, and with all of our industry and such. The worry that I had, Bill, was that when things, and they mentioned that it would be baked, not burned, it would be baked, this refuse, if you will. And what would happen is that there would be particulates that could not be measured under 25 thousandths, I believe. The state and federal government can measure certain windows of particulates, and they can control on that. But the smaller particulates that are unforeseeable or undetectable are the ones that cause COPD and other respiratory illnesses. And I think that's another reason we fought this, because we thought with the air quality we have in Brown County, that over a long, long period of time, with the amount of garbage and that would be baked, if you will, and the emissions that would come from it, that there would be some residual effects for years and years to come.
So in that case, the fact that the project had been approved by the Department of Natural Resources and had received all its environmental approvals, you weighed that against what we just mentioned.
And Bill, believe me, we didn't take this lightly. I think there's this general impression that, they just flipped their vote and they cost the city this, that, and the other thing. I think one thing you must remember is that the village of Ashwaubenon, the village of Hobart, and the Oneida tribe itself did not want this project on their property. Mm-hmm. The city opened their arms and said, we'll take it. And there wasn't a whole lot of vetting on this either. I mean, if you think about 24/7 garbage trucks coming down Military and Velp Avenue, It would have been like that. You would have had a constant flow of trucks with garbage. And the fact is, they were talking about that they wanted to burn enough of this to produce energy, electricity that would be put onto the grid. And they were hoping for 10, 12, 14% maybe, but it turned out to be like 5% or less. And I think that was an initial attraction to this project. We thought, okay, we can take this off the grid. Well, some of these pyrolysis plants around the world have used wood and other perishable items that will not cause chemical backlash, if you will. And we were worried that some of the products that would be burned, like tires and glass, fluorescent tubes, and other types of materials would cause issue with that. Mm-hmm. And we fought that.
Moving on, Mark, I know you strongly support historic preservation, and you chair the city's Historic Preservation Commission. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
You voted against sending the historic Hotel Northland into receivership and instead supported foreclosure, a process which would have taken longer, would have not fully reimbursed subcontractors, and resuming work at the hotel would have taken longer. Would you agree receivership for the Northland has been a big success so far?
Well, I will tell you this, Bill. This has been a long, drawn-out process again, and I think we've read the paper and seen the news programs on it, et cetera. I have pretty much, backed away from any other emotion on this project. I just want to see it get done. I think I'm at that point. Initially, when I voted for the project, I was hoping that the original development team, was the team that I wanted to see happen.
They had
here.
spectacular plans.
Yeah, they had spectacular plans, and your hope is that these plans would come to fruition. There was a long, storied infight between ownership and what have you, things that we were not privy to. The council and redevelopment authority were left out of the loop on some of this. So when it finally came push to shove, we did not have all the information that we needed to make a really solid decision. So if it seemed like we were being obstructionist, that's part of the reason, because we did not have all the information. And I want to see this hotel done as much as anybody else. As you know, I wrote a story for Voyager magazine on the Hotel Northland and spent many months doing research on it. That building, when it was built in the 1920s, 1923, 24, rejuvenated Green Bay. It was one of the epic moments in the 1920s when Green Bay really became much more of a modern city. And my hope was that the restoration of this hotel in this decade would have done the same thing. And there's still hope that will happen. So, was there a little bit on my sleeve, as far as my emotion? Probably. But, don't be mistaken. I want to see this project complete. And I think the big thing is that we want to see it completed with historical accuracy.
Sure. The good news is millions of dollars in new money have been invested in the project. Renovation of the hotel is fully underway again, and the hotel is becoming an autograph collection property of Marriott International. Those are all very positive developments, and they're looking for a summer-fall completion.
Right. And like I said, I've said very little about this. I have spoken out on this on a number of times, but I will say this, that over the last number of months, I just am holding back and just letting the process take place.
Sure. Also, Mark, an issue currently before the City Council and one that may come up again later this spring is the wheel tax replacing residential special assessments for street repavement and reconstruction. Your vote has prevented the wheel tax from being approved by the council on either a 7-5 vote or the mayor breaking a 6-6 tie. Why the opposition so far?
That has been an interesting issue. The wheel tax itself, for my house, we have 4 cars. So it would be $80 a year, and this would be over a long period of time. I had my road replaced on the west side, repaved, and we had to pay, this was 12 years ago, and we paid about $800. So and that road should last 25, 30 years. So what I'm saying in a sense is that I'm not the biggest fan of the special assessments. I'll be honest about that, and that's where I'm struggling on this issue. I think the fact that taxes, it's like anything else. We are fairly highly taxed in this area. We get fairly decent services for the taxes we do pay, but we're looking at some alternatives. I know Alder Dorff and Alder Weary have looked at a few things, and I'm strongly looking at those. So I just because I voted one way months ago on something doesn't mean that I cannot be convinced otherwise.
Is that what it comes down to for you, the fact that you and your family would have to pay $80 a year in a wheel tax?
Well, for myself personally, I mean, I don't have a ton of money. Like anything, I'm working and trying to keep it all afloat. But $80 doesn't seem like a lot. But if you multiply that over 20, 30 years, that adds up. So that's part of it. I think a lot of times when folks get taxed, they don't like the initial chunk of money that they have to deal with paying. For myself, I personally wouldn't have a problem with it. I've had I would say it's split in my district. I've had maybe 75 folks talk to me about this, and it's pretty close to 50-50. I think in the long run, I'll be honest with you, I think there's going to be something that will come forward. I think when the mayor put this in the budget, that was kind of an
inspiration?
Well, possibly. I don't know. It kind of came in at an 11th hour.
Oh, I see.
And it wasn't really part of it. It was kind of ingrained into the budget, and that was not planned. We weren't prepared for that. Sure. So when we voted against that, it seemed like we were against the wheel tax. We didn't like the way it was presented.
Sure.
So, but we have to do something with the roads. There's no two ways about it. I will say this, that over the last 10 years, that taxes have been level, very level. We have not raised taxes.
Right.
And at one time, this was a line item in the budget, for road repair. And why we took that out, I'll never know. This was 10, 12 years ago, possibly. And I know that my feeling is that you could say, pay me now or pay me later. And that's kind of the mantra that I look at. It's borrowing from the commercial, as you will, and we need a better infrastructure. I have roads in my district that are very, very bad, and the citizens are very upset about it. But I will say they don't want to pay the special assessments either. One thing when you live in a city, I think people need to realize that there's a cost of living in the city. You do have assessments, you have we pay taxes for garbage pickup. If sidewalks need to be repaired, oftentimes the city will pay for a portion of it, but the citizen has to pay as well. And I think people they don't want to pay for the garbage cans or the recycle cans. There was a big stink about that. And I think if citizens realize that, in order to have an effective city, that there will have to be some costs that are incurred by the citizen as well.
My opinion, it has to be paid somehow. Increase property taxes, more bonding for the streets, something else. Keep this current system of special assessments. But you have to do something. And you mentioned keep it as a line item in the budget. Maybe that's part of the solution.
Well, that would be my take. I think that right now it's gotten to the point where it's gotten so bad that we have to do something. But I think one of the things they were talking about was maybe a 4-year window where you would collect it, and that might be possible. But people still have that sensitivity over the tax that helped restore Lambeau Field. That took 16 years or whatever it was, and people got a little antsy about that as well. So and there's a lawsuit going on right now with the county tax. Mm-hmm. That's going on. So it might seem like small potatoes, but if you add it up over a long period of time. I have a family of 4, and we got a lot of expenses, and you just throw that on the pile and try to deal with it.
A bigger picture question: who do you align with more on the council? What I call the economic development progressives, like Alder Bill Galvin, or the economic development conservatives, like Alderman Tom Duane?
Well, that's an interesting question. I will say this. I find that over time that when you look at the council, there seem to be certain camps, if you will, and certain folks vote the same way most of the time. I've kind of thrown that out the window a little bit. I go by the issue. There are times where I've supported the mayor on projects, other times I haven't. There's times where I voted along with Guy Zima, other times I haven't. Same with Tom DeWayne, same with Galvin. I really answer to my citizens, and I don't like to be browbeaten or told that you need to vote this way or that way, and I've gotten that from certain alders over time and the administration. And I think it's very important for us to represent our citizens correctly. We need to listen to them.
The important thing, though, is the issue, not the personalities of the people involved.
Yes, exactly. I look at the issue, and I anger both sides, if you want to know the truth. But I feel for the most part fairly confident that I have voted with from my head and my heart, and that I've listened to the citizenry. I will say this: I worked for the city for 25 years in the planning office, so I know a lot of the folks that work there, and I understand the dynamics of how that building works. And I think it's very important for us to reach out and work with our city staff. And I would say 95% of the time, I've been very satisfied. A lot of times we can solve issues ahead of time before it gets to council.
With good staff work.
Good staff work. And I will never demean staff that way. I mean, I do disagree with staff at times. But, they have a hard job as well. They're trying to do the bidding of the administration. But I will say this, that if you come at it with a mature viewpoint and you try to work with them, you can get some major things done.
As I mentioned, historic preservation is an important topic for you. And some positive things that have happened on that front while you've been chair of the Historic Preservation Commission is that there's a new downtown historic district that's about to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places. There are other properties, more properties that are on the National Register in Green Bay, the YMCA, the Northland Hotel, Whitney School, and some others. Mm-hmm. There's a fabulous new historic preservation planner part-time in the city, Jason Flatt, doing terrific work. And you have a functioning preservation commission that meets most months and consults with property owners and developers. So a lot of good news on that front.
Yes, I'm very encouraged by that. And some of the folks may know that the city of Green Bay does not have a preservation ordinance on the books. We have an advisory ordinance, which really has no teeth. But, citizens get a little antsy when they say, well, don't tell me what to do with my house. But Green Bay being basically the oldest city in the state, we've gone through many upheavals over the years. Some of them fire, storms, some of them older buildings, but a lot of it was raised in the 60s and 70s in the downtown area, as we're familiar with. And we still have quite a bit left, and I think we're trying to relish in that and say, let's not look at things half empty, let's look at things half full. So we're really using this historic designation for the downtown historic district on Adams and Washington and Pine and Cherry Streets as another draw, an economic draw for citizens to come to our area. And these are economic development projects as well. We need to look at it from that standpoint, that it's a boon to your community, not a deterrent.
On the negative side, as you've hinted at, Mark, there's still no movement on revising Green Bay's historic preservation ordinance or making it mandatory. There's still no movement on a 30-day or so waiting period for demolition permits, and there's still no movement on CLG status, and nobody understands what CLG means anyway.
Well, certified local government is CLG, and that there are about 65 of those in the state of Wisconsin. The only ones in our area are De Pere and Alloway. And basically what happens is that if you become a certified local government have status that way, that you have an ordinance that has some teeth to it and takes care of things. As far as everything is working, but it hasn't been enacted yet. What we're waiting for now is the fact that we will have a new council in April next month, and we will push heavily on that. Right now we have several neighborhood meetings set up with the Astor Historic District. And Bill, you remember this back in the 80s and 90s. We had several attempts to have an ordinance placed into Green Bay, but what happened was the citizens fought back. They didn't have enough information, and what we're trying to do is give out as much positive information on the benefits of this ahead of time so that when it comes time to vote, it won't be that painful.
Just a reminder, on the ballot April 3rd are other races beyond Green Bay City Council. There's also the Brown County Board. There's the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Depending on where you live, there are school board races, and there are other contests. So vote April 3rd. And that's it for episode number 7 of the Progress Report. Thank you, Mark, for being on the program.
Thank you, Bill. It was very enjoyable.
And thanks to executive producer Dan Jones, producer Jacob Jones, producer Darian Goheen, editor Christian Rivera, technician Serena Woyak. Be sure to subscribe to Political Radar on YouTube, join the Political Radar community group on Facebook, and you can support this show financially by purchasing Political Radar merchandise from our shop. For more discussion, check out Blind Partisan, plus Green Bay development news on Skyscraper City. Support your local newspaper. This episode of the Progress Report was recorded March 16th, 2018. Thanks for watching. See you next week.